The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the ocean in hues of amber and rose gold. Gentle waves rolled onto the shore, their soft, rhythmic crash a lullaby to the end of a long summer day. The scent of salt water mingled with the faint traces of sunscreen and grilled food from nearby beachgoers. Laughter echoed faintly from a family packing up their picnic. Children chased each other barefoot through the sand, and couples strolled hand in hand, soaking in the final light of the evening. Jack Carter stood by the edge of a weathered wooden shed near the boat docks, wiping sweat from his brow with the hem of his sun-bleached t-shirt. His muscles ached from hauling paddleboards and kayaks all day under the blazing heat, but he didn't complain. This was life, simple, steady, and honest. A small-town boy through and through, Jack never needed much. Just the ocean, his family, and a hard day's work. He stacked the last paddle into its rack and stretched, already thinking about grabbing a cold drink and watching the sunset from the pier. But just as he turned to lock up, a sound shattered the peaceful rhythm of the beach. A scream. Sharp, desperate, real. Someone's drowning, a voice cried out, rising above the din of the evening crowd. Jack's head whipped around. A small cluster of people had gathered near the shoreline, pointing toward the water. Panic buzzed in the air like electricity. He followed their gaze and saw her, a girl flailing helplessly in the surf, dark hair plastered to her face, arms slapping the water as the tide dragged her farther from land. There was no time to think. Jack was moving before the adrenaline could even fully hit him. He ripped off his shirt, his bare feet slapping against the wet sand as he sprinted toward the waves. The ocean, which had been so serene just moments ago, now seemed to roar with intensity. Without hesitation, he dove headfirst into the cold embrace of the Atlantic, muscles cutting through the current with practiced strokes. Jack had been swimming these waters since he was a kid. He knew their temperament, their pull, their danger. But this was different. Every second counted. He locked his eyes on her figure disappearing beneath a crashing wave and kicked harder. The girl resurfaced once, gasping, her eyes wide with terror, and then vanished again beneath the foam. Jack's heart pounded. He pushed forward with everything he had. In that split-second moment, between the quiet hum of life going on around them and the violent churn of the sea, something shifted. It was as if fate itself had paused, holding its breath. Jack didn't know her name. He didn't know where she came from. All he knew was that she needed help, and he wasn't going to let her drown. Little did he know, pulling that girl from the waves would be the beginning of a story neither of them could have imagined. A story that would challenge everything he thought he knew about life, love, and the lines that separate one world from another. The cold hit Jack like a wall the second he plunged into the surf, but he didn't slow down. His arms cut through the churning water, each stroke fueled by instinct, urgency, and something deeper, something he couldn't quite name yet. The waves were stronger than they looked from shore, pulling against him like hands try to drag him down. But Jack had grown up with these waters. He knew how to fight them, and he wasn't about to lose. Up ahead, the girl resurfaced for just a breath, her mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide and wild with fear. Her arms thrashed, desperate but uncoordinated. Then, in an instant, she vanished beneath the waves again. "Hold on," Jack shouted, even though he knew she couldn't hear him. He dove. The world went silent underwater, a blur of movement and shadows. Then he saw her, arms limp, hair floating around her like dark seaweed, body twisted in the current. Jack reached out, wrapped an arm around her waist, and kicked upward with all his strength. They broke the surface with a splash, and the girl coughed weakly before falling still against him. She was panicking earlier, but now she wasn't moving at all. That scared him more than anything. Jack adjusted his grip, tightening his arm around her as he turned toward the shore. The swim back was brutal. The tide fought him every inch of the way. His muscles burned, his lungs screamed for air, but he kept going. Every time a wave crashed over them, he shielded her with his body, forcing himself to push harder, faster. He could hear the crowd on the beach, shouts, gasps, someone calling for help, but it all sounded distant, muffled. The only thing that mattered was getting her to solid ground. Finally, Jack's feet touched the ocean floor. He stumbled forward, water pouring off him, dragging her limp form toward the sand. As soon as they reached the shallows, he dropped to his knees and lowered her carefully onto the wet beach. "She's not breathing," someone yelled from behind. Jack's training kicked in without hesitation. He tilted her head back, checked her pulse, faint, too faint, then pressed his hands against her chest and began compressions. His jaw clenched. "Come on," he muttered, counting each push. "Don't do this. Breathe." No response. He pinched her nose, sealed his mouth over hers, and breathed life into her lungs. One breath, then another. Still nothing. He did it again, and again. Then, suddenly, she jerked beneath his hands. A violent cough burst from her lips, followed by a rush of seawater. Her chest heaved as she sucked in a ragged, shuddering breath. The entire crowd exhaled in unison, as if they'd all been holding it. Jack leaned back, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, chest heaving. Relief washed over him like a second wave, heavier than the ocean itself. She blinked slowly, dazed. Her lashes were clumped with salt, her face pale and streaked with water. But her eyes, those deep brown eyes, locked onto his, and something passed between them in that instant. Something unspoken, not just fear or gratitude, but a strange, silent recognition, as if fate had just turned a page. "You're okay," Jack said softly, his voice barely audible over the fading roar of the waves. "Just breathe." And she did. Jack had saved people before. He'd pulled careless tourists from riptides, helped children who drifted too far on floaties. But this was different. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him, like he wasn't just a rescuer, but an anchor in the middle of chaos. As the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, and the crowd slowly came back to life, Jack stayed kneeling beside her, still catching his breath. He didn't know her name or who she was, but something told him that saving her wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The clinic was quiet, the kind of stillness that settles in once the initial chaos passes. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale, sterile glow across the small coastal facility. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor was the only steady sound, a fragile tether between life and silence. Jack sat in a hard plastic chair beside the hospital bed, his arms crossed over his chest, clothes still damp and clinging to his skin. He hadn't planned to stay this long. After the paramedics arrived, he could have walked away, could have gone home, showered, and tried to forget the adrenaline that still pulsed faintly through his veins. But he didn't. Something made him stay. The girl, whoever she was lying there, pale against the white sheets, her breath shallow but steady now. Jack found his eyes drifting toward her again and again, as if to confirm she was really still breathing, that he hadn't just imagined the whole thing. Time passed slowly. Nurses moved in and out, checking vitals, murmuring updates he barely registered. Jack didn't ask questions. He just waited. Then, finally she stirred. A faint groan escaped her lips as her fingers twitched against the blanket. Her lashes fluttered, then opened fully, revealing eyes the color of dark coffee. They blinked, slowly at first, clouded with confusion. Jack leaned forward slightly. "Hey," he said gently. "Take it easy." Her gaze found him, unfocused for a moment, then recognition sparked. "You," she rasped, voice rough and fragile. Jack gave a small smile, nodding. "Yeah, me." She frowned slightly, glancing around the room before her hand instinctively reached for the forward of her arm. "Where am I?" "The local clinic," Jack replied. "You were pulled out of the ocean. You almost drowned." She closed her eyes briefly as the memory crept back in. "Right, the current." Jack nodded. "But you're okay now." There was a pause, long, heavy, and then she looked at him again, more closely this time. "You saved me." He shrugged, brushing a hand through his damp hair. "Guess I was in the right place at the right time." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was full of something else, curiosity, gratitude, maybe even disbelief. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice softer. "Jack. Jack Carter." She studied him for a second, then said, "I'm Olivia. Olivia Parker. The name didn't mean anything to Jack at first. He just nodded politely, about to say something when she added, "My dad is William Parker." That one landed. Jack's brows lifted faintly. Even someone like him, who didn't read business magazines or care about corporate empires, had heard of Parker Enterprises. They were everywhere. Real estate, development, finance. A name you saw on skyscrapers and resorts. And this girl lying in a tiny clinic bed, wrapped in hospital sheets, was part of that world. He blinked, then offered a faint, amused smile. "Well, I guess that makes you important, huh?" Olivia laughed under her breath, the sound a little surprised. Something like that. But what struck her more than his words was his tone. No awe, no shift in the way he looked at her, no calculation in his eyes. Just the same quiet guy who'd pulled her from the sea and sat by her side, without ever asking for anything. "I just thought you should know," she said after a beat. "Since you saved my life." Jack leaned back, resting his arm on the edge of the chair. "Doesn't change anything." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, voice calm but certain, "whether you're a billionaire's daughter or just some girl on vacation. You were drowning. That's all I saw." For a moment, Olivia didn't know what to say. She was used to people's reactions changing the second they learned her last name. The way their eyes lit up with interest, with want. But this guy, he looked at her like none of it mattered. And that did something to her. She glanced down at her hands, noticing the chipped remnants of her nail polish, the foreline, the slight trembling in her fingers. "Most people," she said quietly, "either want something from me, or they're afraid of my dad." Jack shrugged. "Well, I'm not most people." A silence stretched between them again, but this time it felt less like distance and more like understanding. Something was beginning to form there. Not friendship, not yet, but a strange kind of trust. For Olivia, it was the first time in a long while that someone saw her. Not the Parker name, not the fortune, but just a girl who'd nearly died in the ocean and was now trying to breathe again. And for Jack, it was the first time he looked into a stranger's eyes and saw the spark of a story that hadn't been written yet. Neither of them knew where this would lead, but both of them felt it. Something had begun. The days that followed passed with a kind of quiet rhythm neither Jack nor Olivia had expected. What had started as a chance encounter, one of life and death, began to bloom into something far more complex. Olivia stayed in town, recovering, but also exploring. She said it was to rest, to get her strength back. But the truth was, she didn't want to leave just yet. Jack found himself at her side more often than not. At first, it was under the guise of making sure she was okay, answering her questions about the town, or giving her rides when she needed them. But the excuses quickly faded, replaced by something simple. They just wanted to be around each other. He introduced her to his world one piece at a time. Not with grand gestures or tourist spots, but with the quiet things that made up his everyday. The first time he brought her out on the boat, she showed up in denim shorts and a plain white tank top, squinting into the sun like she was seeing the world differently already. "Ever been on one of these?" Jack asked, offering her a steadying hand as she stepped onto the boat. She glanced around, cautious. "Only yachts," she said with a wry smile. "This feels smaller." Jack smirked. "It's called character." She rolled her eyes, but the sparkle in them was real. They spent hours out on the water, Jack guiding her through the basics, how to steer, how to read the wind, how to cast a line and wait. Olivia, to her credit, dove into it all with an enthusiasm that surprised even her. She wrinkled her nose at the smell of bait, shrieked the first time a fish flopped too close to her, and laughed until she cried when she accidentally dropped the rod in the water. But she was smiling, real open smiles, and Jack couldn't help but notice. When the sun got high and the water stilled, they anchored near a quiet inlet, and Jack challenged her to jump in. Olivia hesitated, eyeing the deep blue water. "I already almost died in this ocean, remember?" Jack grinned. That was the ocean in charge. "This time it's you." She stared at the waves for a long moment, then peeled off her top, revealing the bikini she'd hidden underneath. "Okay, sailor," she said before diving in. The splash was clean, her form surprisingly graceful. Jack followed her seconds later, and soon they were floating side by side, letting the sun warm their faces and the water rock them gently. For the first time in her life, Olivia Parker felt weightless, not just physically, but emotionally. No cameras, no headlines, no board meetings or charity events or fitting the image her family expected of her. Just a boat, the sea, and a boy who didn't care what her last name was. "I get why you love it here," she said one evening as they walked barefoot along the beach. "It's quiet, simple, real." Jack looked over at her, his hands tucked into his pockets. "It's all I've ever known." She nodded, then stopped walking. Her gaze turned out toward the horizon, her voice softer when she spoke again. "Back home, everything is scheduled, structured. My life's not really mine, not fully. I'm told where to go, who to smile at, what decisions to make. And if I ever question it, I get reminded, gently of course, that I'm a Parker, which is really just a fancy way of saying, I don't get to choose." Jack was silent, letting her words hang in the air. He didn't pretend to understand all of it, but he could feel the weight behind them. "You ever feel like that?" she asked, turning to him. "Like your whole path was laid out before you had a chance to say yes or no?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, not because of money though. Just life, responsibility, family. You do what you have to, not always what you want to." They kept walking, the tide brushing their feet, the moon rising quietly above them. The romance between them didn't announce itself loudly. It didn't need to. It was in the way she leaned into him when she laughed, in the way he remembered to bring her favorite iced tea when they met up, in the quiet glances they shared when words weren't necessary. Somewhere between sunrises on the dock and sunsets on the shore, something unspoken formed, a bond that didn't care about backgrounds or bank accounts, a connection built not on where they came from, but on who they were when they were finally free to be themselves. And as the summer days stretched on, both Jack and Olivia began to realize that what they'd found wasn't just an escape. It was the beginning of something real. The morning Olivia left, the sky was unusually gray, as if the sun itself had decided to sleep in. A breeze rolled in from the ocean, cooler than it had been in days, stirring the edges of sand and memories that hadn't even had time to settle. Jack stood at the docks, his hands busy adjusting the ropes on one of the boats, though his mind was anywhere but there. The weight in his chest had been growing heavier with each passing hour, but he kept his face neutral, his movements steady. He'd always been good at keeping things in: pain, hope, longing. It was easier that way. He heard footsteps approaching behind him, light but hurried. He didn't have to turn around and know it was her. "Jack," Olivia called softly. He turned slowly, and there she was, barefoot on the weather-worn planks, wind tugging at her hair, her eyes darker than he remembered, like the sea before storm. "I have to go," she said, and her voice barely held steady. He nodded once, jaw tight. "When?" "Now." He exhaled through his nose, then looked away, back at the boat, pretending to check a knot that didn't need checking. "Well," he said after a moment, forcing a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes, "it was nice knowing you. Have a safe trip." Olivia blinked at him, caught off guard by the calm dismissal. "That's it." Jack shrugged. "What else should I say?" There was a pause, heavy and raw. Her hands clenched at her sides, unsure of what to do with the silence between them. She wanted to ask him to say something more, anything to break the wall he had quietly built between them. But Jack stood his ground, hiding the ache behind practiced indifference. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "But you have to," he said. "Right?" She didn't answer, not because she disagreed, but because she didn't know anymore. The life waiting for her back in California suddenly felt hollow. All the parties, meetings, and expectations, it all paled compared to the simplicity of sitting next to Jack on a dock, talking about nothing and everything. "You'll forget me," she said, half joking, half afraid. Jack's eyes flicked to hers, something sharp flashing beneath the surface. Not a chance. The wind picked up again, and with it came the sound of a car door closing in the distance. Her ride was waiting. She hesitated, then took a few steps toward him as if daring him to stop her. But Jack didn't move. He couldn't. If he let himself reach for her now, he wasn't sure he'd be able to let go. "I guess this is goodbye," Olivia said, her voice low. Jack nodded again, even though every part of him wanted to scream no. She turned, slowly walking back down the dock. Each step away from him felt heavier than the last. She didn't look back, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't trust herself to keep walking if she did. And Jack, watching her go, felt something inside him unravel. Where her car disappeared down the winding coastal road, the world felt smaller. That night, the town settled into its usual hush, the beach growing quiet except for the sound of waves lapping at the shore. Jack sat alone near the docks, a bottle of soda in his hand, eyes on the water. The same water he had pulled her from, the same water that had brought them together. But tonight it felt empty. He returned to his routine the next morning. Early shifts, boat repairs, kayak rentals. He smiled at customers, joked with co-workers, and kept himself moving. But something was different. The sun didn't feel quite as warm. The silence in the boat felt heavier. The ocean, once a place of peace, now held echoes of laughter that no longer belonged to the wind. Everyone around him thought Olivia Parker was just a summer girl, a fleeting memory, gone as quickly as she'd arrived. But Jack knew better. She wasn't just someone he'd met. She was the piece of his world he didn't know he was missing until she was gone. Summer gave way to the quieter winds of September, but for Jack Carter, the season never really ended. Not in the way that mattered. Olivia had been gone for weeks, and though he told himself it was just a chapter closed, her absence clung to him like salt in his clothes, subtle, persistent, impossible to ignore. He poured himself into work, opened a rental shack before dawn, stayed after dark to clean the boats no one else wanted to touch. He picked up odd jobs in town, mending fences, patching roofs, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind quiet. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It started with a phone call. Jack was finishing up repairs on a cracked paddleboard when his younger sister, Emma, rang him in a panic. Her voice trembled on the other end of the line. "It's Mom," she said, breathless. She collapsed in the kitchen. "They've taken her to the hospital." Jack didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. He just dropped everything and ran. When he reached the small hospital, he found his mother pale and fragile in a hospital bed, her breathing shallow, her lips tinged with exhaustion. The doctor, a tired man with kind eyes, gave the news with the bluntness Jack had come to expect from small-town medicine. "She has a heart condition," he said. "It's been developing for some time. She's been ignoring the signs." That part didn't surprise Jack. His mother had always been the type to push through pain, to smile even when she was hurting. She'd raised 2 kids on her own, worked 3 jobs when his dad left, and never once asked for help. But now, the cracks were showing. "She'll need long-term care," the doctor continued. "Medication, regular monitoring, possibly surgery." Jack didn't need to hear the numbers to know what that meant. They didn't have the money, not for treatment like that. So he did what he always did. He went to work. He doubled his hours, took on night shifts cleaning fishing boats, painted old barns under the burning sun, hauled junk for neighbors, fixed what he could, mowed lawns until his hands blistered and his back screamed. Sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford. And still, it wasn't enough. The bills piled up, one on top of another, until the mail became something he dreaded. Final notices, overdue statements, insurance forms he didn't know how to fill out. Then came the final blow. It was a Tuesday afternoon, hot and thick with humidity, when Carl, his longtime boss at the boat rental shop, called him into the office. Jack wiped his hands on his shirt, thinking it was about the broken motor he'd been patching. Instead, Carl wouldn't meet his eyes. "There's no easy way to say this," he started, rubbing the back of his neck. "We're bringing in new management next week. Corporate types. They're making changes." Jack stood still. "What kind of changes?" Carl hesitated. "They want to rebrand, attract more upscale visitors. They're letting go of the current crew." Jack's voice dropped. "You're firing me? You're the best worker I've ever had, Jack. You know that. But it's out of my hands. They want people who fit the new image." Jack didn't ask what that meant. He didn't have to. He walked out without another word. That night, he sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by dim light and silence. His mother had fallen asleep in her recliner, her breathing raspy and uneven. Emma was upstairs, pretending not to worry. Jack stared at the envelope in front of him. He didn't need to open it to know what it said. He had seen enough like it by now. Foreclosure notice. The house, the only thing his mother had left from a lifetime of sacrifice, was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He felt it then. Not just tired, not just angry, but something deeper. A drowning. Not in water this time, but in pressure, in fear, in the overwhelming knowledge that no matter how hard he fought, it was never enough. The boy who once saved a stranger from the sea now found himself gasping for breath in a storm he couldn't escape. And for the first time in his life, Jack Carter had no idea how to survive. The days blurred together, a cycle of work, worry, and waiting. Jack spent his mornings searching for jobs that didn't exist and his afternoons juggling repairs around town for whatever cash people could spare. At night, he sat on the porch with a blank stare, listening to the creak of old wood beneath his boots and the sound of his mother coughing softly from inside. The foreclosure notice, now folded and worn from being handled too often, sat like a silent weight in his back pocket. The garden his mother once loved had withered in the heat, overtaken by weeds. Paint peeled from the porch rails. The house sagged in quiet defeat, much like Jack himself. And then, on a late afternoon soaked in the heat of impending summer, a sound broke the stillness, a low hum, the smooth purr of an engine that didn't belong on this side of town. Jack looked up. A sleek black car pulled to a stop in front of the house, polished and gleaming like something from another world. He stood, frowning, wiping his hands on a rag already stained with grease. The driver stepped out, suited, professional, and moved to open the back door. Then she appeared. Olivia, but not the Olivia he'd watched disappear weeks ago. This wasn't the girl in wind-tousled hair and a salt-stained tank top, laughing barefoot on the sand. This Olivia stood straight, her steps confident, her blouse smooth, her blazer tailored, her presence commanding. Yet when her eyes met his, all of that melted away. Jack's breath caught, but he masked it with a tight nod. Did you get lost? Or are you just visiting the poor side of town for fun? A small smile tugged at her lips, but it faded just as quickly as her gaze drifted past him to the worn-down house. She stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the gravel. I came to see you. Jack's arms folded across his chest. Why? Her voice was quiet but firm. Because I know. About your mom. About the foreclosure. About everything. His jaw tensed. Who told you? I asked, she said simply. After I left, I kept thinking about you. I couldn't stop. So I found someone who could tell me what I couldn't see for myself. Jack gave a bitter laugh. So what is this then? A charity drop-off? Some kind of guilt offering? Her eyes flashed. No, this isn't about pity. It's about respect. And a chance. Jack blinked, caught off guard. A chance for what? Olivia reached into the sleek leather bag, draped over her shoulder, and pulled out a folder. She held it out to him, but he didn't take it right away. I started something, she explained. A foundation. We're building homes for families who have nothing. People like the ones I used to ignore. People like us. Jack raised an eyebrow. Us? She stepped closer. I left that world, Jack. Not all of it, but enough to see it clearly. And I realized I didn't want to just write checks anymore. I wanted to build something that mattered. He looked at the folder in her hand, still unopened. I need people I can trust, Olivia continued. People who know how to work. People who know what it feels like to fight for something. I don't need a resume from you. I need you. Finally, Jack took the folder and opened it slowly. Inside were blueprints, names, numbers, real projects already underway. The offer wasn't just real. It was personal. You want me to help build homes? He asked, not hiding the disbelief in his voice. I want you to help build hope, she said. He stared down at the papers, then back at her. Why me? Her answer was simple. Because when I was drowning, you didn't hesitate. You didn't ask who I was or what I could offer. You just saved me. Her voice softened. This time, I want to return the favor. Not with money, with purpose. Jack swallowed hard, the words hitting somewhere deep. She took a breath. You don't have to decide now. But if you want it, there's a place for you. A new start. A real shot. The wind picked up just then, rustling the pages in his hands. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt something stirring inside him that had been missing for weeks. Possibility. As Olivia stepped back toward the car, she paused and looked over her shoulder. "I'll be in town for a few more days, just in case you say yes." Then she was gone, but her words stayed. And Jack, standing barefoot on a crumbling porch with sawdust in his hair and 1,000 worries in his head, looked down at the folder again. A job, a purpose, a way out. Hope had pulled up in a black car and called his name. And this time, he wasn't going to let it drive away. Los Angeles was nothing like the Outer Banks. The city moved fast, its skyline piercing the sky like ambition made concrete. Everything felt larger, louder, more intense. And for the first few weeks, Jack Carter felt like a grain of sand in a machine far too big to notice someone like him. But he worked. He worked like his life depended on it, because in a way it did. The foundation Olivia had built wasn't just a name on paper. It was real. Blueprints stacked in filing cabinets, contractors yelling over the sound of drills, families waiting with hope clinging to their sleeves. And Jack, thrown into the heart of it, learned fast. He started with a hammer and a pair of worn gloves. Learned how to pour foundations in the hot California sun, how to coordinate volunteers, how to keep deadlines on track, how to fix problems before anyone even noticed they existed. He became a force on the site, not because he demanded attention, but because he earned respect the way he always had, by showing up early, working harder, and never asking for more than he gave. Some of the other workers had whispered at first. The guy from the beach, the one Olivia brought in, maybe a favor, maybe something more. But those whispers died off quickly, drowned out by the echo of Jack's boots hitting the concrete before dawn and the way people naturally began looking to him when things got tough. Even William Parker took notice. At first, Olivia's father watched Jack from a distance, arms crossed, eyes skeptical. To him, Jack was a question mark. An unknown from a world far removed from polished boardrooms and high-rise deals. But over time, the doubt softened. William saw how the crew listened to Jack, how he led without trying to lead. And one day, after watching Jack problem-solve an entire construction delay without losing his temper, William walked over, extended a hand, and said simply, "You've got potential, son." That handshake said more than approval. It said belonging. Jack didn't need much more than that. But amid all the progress, all the sawdust and sweat, there was one thing that made LA feel like home: Olivia. They carved out moments together in the chaos. Early mornings with coffee before meetings, late night drives along the coast, long talks on the balcony of her apartment where the city lights shimmered like stars. Their lives were busy, but their bond only grew stronger. What had started on the sand, under the threat of waves, had matured into something solid and sure. Jack had never said the words aloud before, but he thought them constantly. "I love her." And then, one evening, with the sky melting into hues of purple and gold, he decided to say it forever. They walked barefoot along the beach in Malibu, just the two of them, with the wind curling around them like a soft blanket. Olivia had kicked off her sandals and was letting the surf kiss her feet, laughing at something Jack had just said. He watched her for a moment, his hands buried in his pockets, his heart beating faster than usual. She turned to him, curious. "What?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he dropped to one knee in the sand. Olivia froze. Jack pulled something from his pocket. Not a ring box, but a small velvet pouch. From it, he revealed a ring not made of gold, not inlaid with diamonds, but crafted from a tiny seashell. Smooth, polished, perfect in its imperfection. A piece of the Outer Banks. A piece of their beginning. "I don't have a mansion," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I don't have a fortune. I don't come from your world. But I have this," he held up the ring, "and I have you. And that's all I've ever wanted." She covered her mouth with one hand, tears already pooling in her eyes. "I love you, Olivia Parker," Jack continued. "Not the version on magazine covers. Not the daughter of Parker Enterprises. Just you. The girl who challenged me, who changed me, who made me believe I could be more." He swallowed. "So, will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, all she could do was stare, the waves crashing softly behind them like the world waiting to exhale. Then she nodded, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Yes." Jack slipped the shell ring onto her finger, and before he could stand, she dropped to her knees too, pulling him into her arms, laughing through tears. And there, on the sand where their worlds had once seemed oceans apart, they sealed a promise. Not in wealth, not in tradition, but in something stronger. Love that had been tested, love that had endured, love that had chosen. The sky was painted in soft gold and rose as the sun sank toward the sea, casting a warm glow across the beach where rows of simple white chairs had been set in a gentle arc. Fairy lights strung between driftwood posts swayed slightly in the ocean breeze, twinkling like stars preparing to appear early just for this moment. There were no grand floral arches, no celebrity photographers or designer gowns. But the beauty of it all was unmistakable, honest, grounded, and completely theirs. Jack stood barefoot in the sand, a linen shirt loosely buttoned over khaki pants, hands loosely clasped in front of him as he stared out toward the horizon. His hair danced in the breeze, and though he looked calm, his heart thundered beneath his chest. This wasn't just a wedding. This was a promise, the kind that wasn't written in contracts or tied to fortunes. It was written in everything they had endured to reach this day. Olivia appeared at the edge of the dune path, her white dress simple and flowing, catching the wind like a sail. Her hair was down, curled slightly by the salt air, and her feet were bare, toes sinking into the sand with every step. She wore no jewels, no veil. The only thing that sparkled was her smile, soft, radiant, and fixed on the man waiting for her. As she walked down the aisle, the only sound was the ocean behind her and the quiet sniffles of family and friends gathered in a semicircle. Emma, Jack's sister, stood proudly beside him as his best woman, her eyes already brimming. Olivia's childhood friend held her bouquet with a hand pressed to her chest, beaming. And sitting just 2 rows back, dressed in a muted gray suit, was William Parker. He watched his daughter with a look no business meeting had ever brought to his face. There was no boardroom pride here. Only the quiet, personal kind, the kind that comes from seeing your child find happiness in a place you never expected. When Olivia reached Jack, she took his hands in hers, and for a moment, the world disappeared. No past, no expectations, just them. The officiant stepped forward, but even his voice seemed secondary to the power of the silence between their vows. They hadn't written speeches filled with poetry or theatrics. Their promises were spoken softly, deliberately, as if carving them into the sand with each word. "I don't vow to be perfect," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "But I vow to be present, to listen, to grow, to stand beside you not just when life is easy, but especially when it's hard. I vow to build with you, not just houses, but a life." Olivia blinked back tears as she answered, "I don't vow to live by the expectations of the world I came from. I vow to live by the truth we've created, to choose you over and over again, to love you not for what you give me, but for who you are and who we are together." They slipped rings onto each other's fingers, hers still the same seashell Jack had carved with his own hands, shaped by the tide, softened by time. When the words were spoken, when the officiant smiled and said, "You may kiss the bride," Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled Olivia into his arms and kissed her like he'd waited a lifetime. The crowd cheered, but even that sound seemed far away because for Jack and Olivia, there was only this moment. Not a merger, not an empire, not a performance, just love, real, raw, and lasting. Later, as the sun dipped below the water and laughter rose around the bonfire, Jack and Olivia sat hand in hand on a weathered bench, watching the flames flicker against the backdrop of the ocean. They didn't need to speak. Their future didn't glitter with gold. It shone in something stronger. Purpose, togetherness, a forever that didn't come wrapped in legacy, but in the promise of choosing each other every day. And as the stars blinked to life above them, Olivia rested her head on Jack's shoulder, her heart full, her world finally right. Not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. The months that followed their wedding unfolded not like a fairy tale, but like a purpose-fueled journey, real, tangible, and rooted in something deeper than ever after. Jack and Olivia didn't disappear into luxury or settle into a life of quiet comfort. Instead, they laced up their boots, rolled up their sleeves, and got to work. Together, they expanded the foundation Olivia had started in Los Angeles, reaching beyond city limits, beyond state lines, all the way to the Outer Banks of Virginia, where the story between them had first been written in salt water and sand. Jack had always said he wanted to give something back to the place that raised him, and Olivia, who now craved meaning more than prestige, understood completely. When they arrived back in his hometown, it wasn't as newlyweds looking for nostalgia. It was as builders, dreamers, partners with a mission. Jack walked those familiar streets with a new sense of pride, not because of what he wore or what name he carried, but because he was creating change from the inside out. They started small, renovating old homes, partnering with local churches and charities. Word spread quickly. Volunteers showed up. Materials were donated. People who had known Jack his whole life came forward, not just to watch, but to help. And Olivia, who once lived in high-rise penthouses and moved through rooms lined with marble floors, found more joy here, handing over a set of house keys to a single mother, painting the nursery of a young couple's first home. Did she ever had walking red carpets or attending galas? She traded designer heels for work boots, conference calls for community cookouts, and she never looked back. They traveled often, coordinating projects across the country, building homes in places devastated by floods, fires, or forgotten poverty. Sometimes they were covered in dust before lunch. Sometimes they shared air mattresses in community centers while roofs were still going up. But no matter where they went together. Jack had once thought love would be the prize at the end of a long road. But instead, it became the engine, the driving force behind everything they did. They didn't just build structures. They built trust, stability, futures. And brick by brick, nail by nail, they left a trail of hope wherever they went. Still, no matter how far they traveled, they always returned to the beach. That stretch of coast in Virginia had become their sacred place. Not because it was perfect, but because it had changed everything. Every year, no matter what was happening, they made time to come back, to sit on the old dock, to walk along the water's edge, to remind themselves of where they began. Not as a millionaire's daughter and a small-town boy, but as two people pulled together by fate, held together by choice. One quiet evening, as they watched the waves roll in under a silver sky, Olivia reached over and laced her fingers through Jack's. "Do you think," she asked, "we'll ever stop coming back here?" Jack glanced at her, smiling softly. "Not chance. This is home." And in that silence, beneath the endless sky, with salt in the air and the sound of the tide whispering promises, they both knew the legacy they were building wasn't one of wealth or reputation. It was one of love, of service, of something lasting. A legacy not born from the world they came from, but from the life they chose to create together. The sky was a canvas of gold and lavender, the sun dipping low as if reluctant to say goodbye to the day. The beach was quiet, emptied of tourists, just the way Jack and Olivia liked it, silent except for the hum of waves rolling in and the occasional cry of a distant gull. They sat side by side on a blanket, barefoot, the sand cool beneath them, a soft breeze brushing through Olivia's hair. Jack leaned back on his hands, staring out at the horizon, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, a small smile playing on his lips. Olivia sat cross-legged beside him, her head tilted slightly, eyes thoughtful as she traced lazy circles in the sand. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked, her voice gentle. He glanced sideways. "Think about what?" "The day you saved me." Jack chuckled, his smile widening as he stretched his legs out in front of him. "You mean the day you thought you could conquer the Atlantic like it was a fancy hotel pool?" She smacked his arm lightly, grinning. "I didn't know about rip currents, okay? No one teaches that in private school." He shook his head, laughing under his breath. "Yeah, I remember. I thought I was dragging out a hurricane." For a moment, they just smiled at each other, the memory alive between them. But then Jack's smile faded slightly, replaced by something quieter, more real. He turned his gaze back to the ocean, voice low now. but sometimes I think maybe I didn't just save you." Olivia looked at him, the teasing gone from her face. "I think we saved each other," Jack said. There was no dramatic pause, no music playing in the background. Just the truth, simple and steady, like the waves that had always brought them back here. Olivia's eyes softened as she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. She didn't say anything right away, because she didn't have to. The words had already settled deep in her chest. She remembered who she'd been that day. A girl exhausted by expectations, unsure of her place in the world, clinging to the version of herself others had created. And she nearly drowned in more ways than one. But then there was Jack. Not just the boy who pulled her from the water, but the man who taught her how to breathe again, how to choose her own path, how to live. And Jack, who had once believed he'd never leave his small town, who thought life was just a matter of surviving, had been given something else entirely. Purpose, love, a future that reached far beyond the horizon. Their story wasn't the kind told at black tie events or printed in magazines. It wasn't built on wealth or legacy or carefully curated appearances. It was a story of chance, of a scream on a beach and a boy who ran toward it. It was a story of kindness without expectation, of resilience when everything was falling apart, of two lives from different worlds finding their way to each other. Not because they were looking, but because they needed to. As the sun disappeared and the sky deepened into navy blue, Jack and Olivia sat quietly, hand in hand, hearts full. Around them, the beach faded into twilight, but something between them glowed brighter than ever. Their story had come full circle, not an ending, but a promise that no matter where life took them next, they would face it the way they always had, together. And for them, that was more than enough. They came from two worlds that were never meant to collide, one shaped by wealth and legacy, the other by grit and survival. She was the daughter of a billion-dollar empire, raised in a world of expectations, marble floors, and spotless reputations. He was the son of a weathered coastal town, raised on hard work, quiet strength, and the belief that life rarely gave out second chances. But fate, with all its mystery and timing, had other plans. What started as a moment in the waves, a desperate gasp, a fearless rescue, became something far more powerful. Not just a bond, not just a romance, but a transformation. Together, Jack and Olivia did more than fall in love. They built something no money could buy and no name could guarantee. They built trust, purpose, a life that mattered. They didn't choose the easiest path. There were doubts, distance, pain, but they chose each other again and again. And in a world where people so often chase image, status, or control, they prove that love, real love, is built on presence, sacrifice, and the willingness to keep showing up. She let go of perfection to find peace. He let go of pride to embrace possibility. And together, they created a legacy, not of power, but of kindness. Of homes, not headlines. Of service, not status. Because at the end of the day, theirs was not a story about a rescue. It was about redemption. They came from two worlds, but chose one life. Built not on gold, but on trust. And that made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Michael Stories. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that find us.